President Trump a short time ago telling Walmart that the company should, I'm quoting now, eat the cost, end quote, of higher tariffs. The comments come after the retail giant said this week that it would raise prices because of Trump's tariffs being too high.
Some breaking news happened just a few moments ago. Walmart now saying it must raise prices to deal with the cost of tariffs.
Walmart says tariffs will drive up prices but avoid panic buying. Do this instead. Walmart and Target may lose access to popular products in tariff war.
Today, President Donald Trump told Walmart to, quote, eat the cost of rising tariffs so they can keep prices low for consumers. Walmart announced Thursday they would begin passing on rising costs to shoppers at the end of this month, but they didn't specify by how much. President Trump posted on social media that between Walmart and China, they should, quote, eat the tariffs and not charge customers anything.
Tariffs don't cause inflation, they cause success. There could be some temporary short-term disruption, and people will understand that. I got elected for a lot of reasons. Number one was the border. Number two was inflation, because I had almost no inflation, and yet I charged hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs to countries.
Breaking. A major shift may be unfolding in global business, and it starts with a new tax policy that is now sending shockwaves through boardrooms, supply chains, and international markets. A 15% tax recently introduced in the United States has triggered intense debate among economists, business leaders, and policymakers. Within days of the announcement, attention turned to how large multinational companies might respond. Now, growing signals point to major retailers like Amazon and Walmart exploring deeper moves into Africa, raising questions about jobs, investment, and America's economic position. First, let's focus on what is known. The 15% tax was designed to increase government revenue and adjust how large corporations contribute to the national budget. The policy applies broadly, affecting profit structures, logistics planning, and long-term investment strategies. For companies that operate on thin margins in certain divisions, even a small percentage shift can alter where future growth makes the most sense. Shortly after the tax came into effect, corporate filings, investor calls, and supply chain updates showed increased attention on emerging markets. Africa stood out, not as a sudden discovery, but as a region that has been quietly positioning itself for years. Several African countries have invested heavily in infrastructure, digital payments, logistics hubs, and trade-friendly regulations. These developments did not happen overnight, but they are now becoming impossible to ignore. Amazon has already been expanding its cloud services, logistics partnerships, and e-commerce experiments across multiple African markets. Walmart, through ownership stakes and partnerships with regional retailers, has also maintained a presence. On the continent, what is different now is the scale and urgency of these discussions. Analysts warn that higher domestic operating costs in the United States can accelerate decisions that were once considered long-term or optional. From a business perspective, companies are driven by predictability and cost efficiency. Africa offers rapidly growing consumer populations, younger demographics, and increasing urbanization. Many governments on the continent are offering tax incentives, special economic zones, and simplified regulations to attract foreign investment. When combined with rising costs at home, the math begins to shift. This does not mean companies are abandoning the United States, far from it. The U.S. remains one of the largest and most profitable consumer markets in the world. However, expansion budgets are finite. When companies choose where to build the next warehouse, data center, or fulfillment hub, comparative costs matter. This could mean future growth happens elsewhere, even if existing operations remain. Labor is another key factor. Africa's workforce is expanding rapidly, with millions of young people entering the job market each year. Wages in many regions remain lower than in developed economies, while skill levels are improving due to education and training programs. For logistics, customer service, and technology support roles, this combination is attractive. Analysts warn that if investment flows follow labor availability, job creation may increasingly occur. Outside traditional Western markets, there is also the issue of proximity to future consumers. Africa's population is expected to double in the coming decades. Consumer spending is rising, especially in urban centers. Companies that establish early logistics networks and brand loyalty may gain long-term advantages. The 15% tax did not create this trend, but it may have accelerated corporate timelines. From the U.S. government's perspective, the tax was never intended to push companies away. It was meant to rebalance fiscal priorities. Yet global markets do not respond to intention alone, they respond to outcomes. When operating costs rise in one location and fall or remain stable in another, capital moves. This is not political ideology, it is economic behavior. Some critics argue that fears of companies heading to Africa are overstated. They point out that moving large-scale operations is complex, expensive, and risky. That is true. Supply chains cannot be relocated overnight. Regulatory environments differ widely across African countries. Infrastructure gaps still exist in some regions. These realities slow down drastic shifts. However, incremental change can be just as powerful. One warehouse here, one data center there, one regional headquarters relocated. Over time, these decisions reshape global trade patterns. This could mean that Africa becomes not just a consumer market, but a production and distribution hub linked to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. For American workers, this raises understandable concerns. If future expansion happens abroad, job growth at home could slow. Analysts warn that even if existing jobs remain secure, fewer new opportunities may be created domestically. This could place additional pressure on local economies already adjusting to automation and technological change. For African countries, the implications are complex. Foreign investment brings jobs, technology, and infrastructure. But it also requires strong governance to ensure benefits are shared broadly. Competition among countries to attract multinational companies can sometimes lead to a race to the bottom on taxes or labor protections. How African governments manage this moment will shape outcomes for decades. There is also a geopolitical dimension. When major U.S. companies deepen their presence in Africa, economic ties grow stronger, trade routes shift, diplomatic relationships evolve. This could mean Africa gains greater leverage in global negotiations, simply by being central to supply chains that serve millions of consumers worldwide. The role of China, Europe, and other global players cannot be ignored. Africa is already a competitive space. New investment from American companies adds another layer. Competition can drive better infrastructure and innovation, but it can also intensify pressure on local businesses. Policymakers will need to balance openness with protection of domestic industries. Back in the United States, debate over the 15% tax is likely to intensify. Supporters argue it ensures fairness and funds public services. Critics say it risks pushing investment abroad. Both views are grounded in legitimate concerns. The real test will be long-term data, not short-term headlines. What makes this moment significant is not just the tax itself, but what it reveals about a changing global economy. Capital is more mobile than ever. Digital platforms allow companies to operate across borders with increasing ease. National policies now interact instantly with global options. This could mean governments must think more carefully about how domestic decisions ripple outward. Amazon and Walmart are symbols in this conversation, but they are not alone. Many mid-sized companies are also rethinking supply chains. Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America are all part of this reassessment. The difference is that Africa's scale and growth potential make it uniquely influential. As this story continues to develop, clarity will matter. Speculation can distort reality. Facts must guide the discussion. What facilities are being built, where capital is actually flowing, how many jobs are created or shifted. These details will determine whether concerns turn into confirmation or fade into overreaction. For now, one thing is clear. The global economic map is being redrawn in real time. Policies made in Washington can influence decisions made in Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, and Johannesburg. Likewise, opportunities created in Africa can reshape corporate strategies in the United States. This could mean a more interconnected world where growth is shared across regions, or it could mean sharper competition for investment and jobs. Much depends on how governments, companies, and workers adapt. In a world where businesses can choose almost any destination, how should countries design policies that protect workers, attract investment, and still compete in a truly global economy? The story does not end with boardroom calculations and tax tables. The deeper impact of this shift begins to appear when we look at how supply chains actually move and how decisions made today can shape economies years from now. When large retailers adjust where they source goods, store inventory, or process digital services, those choices ripple outward, touching ports, roads, workers, and even local politics. One of the clearest signals analysts warn about is the gradual rebalancing of logistics routes. For decades, the United States sat at the center of many global retail networks. Goods flowed in, were processed, packaged, and redistributed. If more fulfillment centers, manufacturing partners, or service hubs emerge in Africa, shipping lanes may increasingly point there first. This could mean African ports gain importance while some U.S. logistics hubs see slower growth. This does not happen overnight, but it starts quietly. Companies test smaller pilot projects, they partner with local firms, they move non-core operations first. Customer support centers, regional distribution for nearby markets, or data processing units are often early steps. Once those systems prove reliable, expansion follows. This could mean Africa becomes embedded into global retail infrastructure in ways that are difficult to reverse. Technology plays a major role here. Modern retail depends on data, automation, and digital coordination. Africa's rapid adoption of mobile payments, fintech platforms, and cloud-based services makes integration easier than in the past. Analysts warn that countries that once lacked traditional banking systems are now leapfrogging into advanced digital economies. This makes them attractive partners for companies that rely on speed and flexibility. For the United States, the concern is not only about jobs but about influence. Economic presence often translates into soft power. When companies invest heavily in a region, they bring standards, practices, and long-term relationships. If more of those ties form outside the U.S., America's role in shaping global commercial norms could gradually weaken. This could mean less leverage in future trade negotiations. On the other hand, some argue this shift could benefit the U.S. in indirect ways. American companies expanding abroad still generate profits that flow back to shareholders. Pension funds, retirement accounts, and investment portfolios may benefit from global growth. The challenge is ensuring that domestic workers are not left behind as capital becomes more global. This is where education and workforce adaptation become critical. Analysts warn that if expansion jobs move abroad, the U.S. must focus on higher value roles at home. Advanced manufacturing, research, logistics management, and technology development are areas where domestic investment could remain strong. However, this requires long-term planning and consistent policy support. Africa's side of the equation is equally complex. While investment brings opportunity, it also brings responsibility. Governments must ensure that labor standards are enforced and that local businesses are not overwhelmed by multinational competition. Infrastructure development must be sustainable, not rushed. Analysts warn that rapid growth without strong institutions can create inequality and instability. There is also the question of regional balance within Africa. Investment does not spread evenly. Certain countries with better ports, political stability, and regulatory clarity are likely to attract more attention. This could mean widening gaps between fast-growing hubs and slower developing regions. Managing this imbalance will be a major challenge for continental cooperation efforts. Trade agreements within Africa add another layer. Regional trade frameworks are designed to reduce barriers between countries, creating larger internal markets. For global retailers, this is appealing. One distribution center can potentially serve multiple countries. This could mean Africa is not just an endpoint but a platform for broader global trade. Meanwhile, small and medium-sized businesses in the United States are watching closely. Large corporations can absorb tax changes more easily by shifting operations. Smaller firms often cannot. Analysts warn that this could widen the gap between corporate giants and domestic competitors. Policy responses may be needed to support local businesses facing higher costs without global options. Consumer impact is another factor. If companies reduce domestic investment, some costs may eventually be passed on through pricing or reduced service expansion. However, global efficiencies can also lower costs. The outcome is uncertain. This could mean consumers see little change, or it could mean subtle shifts in availability, delivery speed, or employment patterns. In retail sectors. Politically, this situation places pressure on policymakers to explain trade-offs clearly. Taxes fund public services, infrastructure, and social programs. Businesses seek competitive environments. Balancing these needs is difficult. Analysts warn that oversimplified narratives can obscure the real complexity of global economics. What makes this moment especially sensitive is timing. The global economy is already adjusting to technological disruption, shifting demographics, and geopolitical uncertainty. Adding tax-driven investment shifts into the mix increases volatility. This could mean faster change than institutions are prepared for. Africa's growing role also challenges outdated perceptions. For many years, the continent was discussed mainly in terms of aid. Now it is increasingly discussed in terms of partnership and opportunity. This change in framing matters. It influences how investment is structured and how long-term commitments are made. For young people in Africa, this moment could shape career paths and expectations. New jobs in logistics, technology, and management may emerge. However, expectations must be realistic. Not every investment delivers immediate prosperity. Skills training, education, and local entrepreneurship remain essential. For workers in the United States, transparency will be key. Understanding where and why companies invest helps build trust. Secrecy fuels fear. Analysts warn that without clear communication, economic shifts can deepen social divides and mistrust in institutions. Looking ahead, the question is not whether global business will continue to diversify geographically. That trend is already underway. The real question is how countries respond. Do they compete purely on cost, or do they invest in resilience, innovation, and human capital? This could mean the difference between decline and adaptation. The 15% tax may ultimately be remembered not as a single policy failure or success, but as a catalyst. It exposed how interconnected the global economy has become. It highlighted the growing importance of Africa, and it forced a conversation about what economic leadership looks like in a multipolar world. As this story continues to unfold, the headlines may focus on individual companies or short-term market reactions. But the deeper story is about long-term direction, where growth happens, who benefits, and how nations define competitiveness in an era where borders matter less to capital than ever before. So as viewers reflect on these developments, one question stands out: in a world where investment can move faster than policy can react, how can governments protect workers and communities while still remaining open to global opportunity?